So good morning, I'm Lucinda Wood with PFH. A very warm welcome to this first of 3 webinars we've developed in partnership with Social Value UK. I'd like to introduce you to Ben Carpenter, who is CEO at Social Value, and he'll be explaining what social value is and why it's important. So over to you, Ben.
Perfect. Okay. Welcome to those of you that are here right now. And as Lucinda said, this is the first of 3 webinars. I'll get going because we have 60 minutes today and plenty to talk about. So, my name's Ben. As Lucinda said, I'm the Chief Executive of Social Value UK and also Social Value International. I'll explain a little bit about those 2 organisations in a moment or two. I'll just outline the fact that this is a mini webinar series. We're very pleased to be working with Procurement for Housing. PFH are a member of Social Value UK, have been for a number of years now, and we've enjoyed working collaboratively with PFH to deliver a range of services on real life training courses, face to face, and now we're sort of experimenting with online, and we've done some videos and blogs as well, and I'm sure Lucinda can point you in the direction of those. So today is webinar 1, and we're really going to be looking at what is social value, why it's important, a bit of an introduction if you like. We'll look at the building blocks for measurement, touch on those really because that's quite a big topic that needs quite a bit of time, and look at a short case study, I think, of how we put that theory into a practical example. Going on to webinar 2, we'll then sort of have a bit more of a focus, deep dive into what social value in the workplace looks like, kind of social value within the workforce, jobs, apprenticeships, volunteering. These are things that we often talk about within social value. So we'll have a closer look at that in webinar 2. Now, webinar 3, we'll turn our attentions to how you can create social value in the community. How can we maximize that opportunity? Again, something we often talk about in social value conversations. So the agenda for today, welcome and introductions. Well, we've done that. I think it's a rather large group, so I won't ask you all to introduce yourself. But what I will ask you to do actually is to make yourself familiar with the chat functionality on the dashboard. If you've used it before, great. If you haven't, then you should be able to see on that panel a chat box, and feel free to use it throughout this webinar today, whether that's to raise questions or comment on anything that's happened. That's really useful, and I'll be looking at that, and towards the end, if anyone's left any questions, we'll pick that up. Okay, so we're soon going to talk about SVUK and SVI. I'll just briefly outline that kind of universe that we're working within, and yeah, we'll unpick what is social value and definitions. There's lots out there. We'll look at why it's really important for both the business perspective and if you're working within public body organisation and particularly procurement. And as I say, we've got a little case study or an example of perhaps how social value can be applied. We'll go into Q&A. All right, so without further ado, let's dive in. Who are Social Value International? Well, Social Value International is a charity with a mission to change the way the world accounts for value. Quite a big mission. But we believe that value for too long has been focused on financial value. We know how to measure financial value through financial accounting, but that doesn't include other things that we value and that are important, like changes to the environment and changes to people's well-being. So we believe that should be brought into our understanding of value. We should be accounting for that, any type of organisation. And if we're accounting for that broader sense of value, we should be able to make better decisions that reduce inequality, environmental degradation, and improve well-being. SVI is a membership-led network of networks, if you like. There's a map there. We've got networks all over the world, and they come together to help develop methodology and standards for this emerging field, because social value accounting is new. There's no denying that. We're working in new territory here. We're trying to change the way the world accounts for value, so we need to develop that together collaboratively. with our networks. And we're very proud that governance-wise, we're owned by our networks. We're a bottom-up community of practitioners. As well as methodology, we develop assurance standards. So what does good look like? And you can submit reports and get assurance and accreditation over your work in this area. And of course, we deliver training also based on methodology that we develop together. Just a couple of slides then on the journey that we're hoping our members go on. As an individual, you can be sort of start as a supporter, become an individual member, and then there's various levels of becoming a social value and SROI practitioner. Actually, we're introducing 2 new levels, so there'll be 3 levels just launching next month. So it's an exciting time. And we want to build a community of practitioners and professionals that can then also deliver SVI accredited training. As an organization, you can come on a pathway with us, which is about, we have a certificate, which is an accreditation scheme to test whether your systems and processes are consistent with our approach for accounting for value. So that's really looking at the practice, not like your reports on the amount of social value that you create, but what is good practice within an organization for measuring and managing social value. Here's the map again, just to kind of illustrate that we are a global movement with about 23 countries having some form of network, all affiliated to SVI, uniting behind one approach to do that, and we'll talk about that later on in today's webinar. The other thing to say about our community, as well as it being diverse geographically, it's diverse in the sense that we have members from different sectors. We have businesses, private sector contributing to these conversations, as well as public sector, people in government, different levels, and also civil society, non-profit organizations, whether that's a charity or a social enterprise. Everybody's coming together with a slightly different starting point, but with a shared aim, which is to really understand better the impact we're having on people's lives. This is a slide just to talk about Social Value UK. As we all, I think, part of the UK, then we align to this network, and I'm Chief Executive of Social Value UK, and we deliver lots of training, events, assurance, tools, and campaigning. You can find out more on our website. So there you go. All of that is to hopefully give you a context of who we are and the universe of social value. Hope that's been useful. But now I want to turn our attention to what is social value. We've been talking for a good 5-10 minutes, and we perhaps should stop and just say, what is social value? In terms of the definition, I sometimes define it by process of elimination. We know what economic value is because that tends to be clearly defined in changes in money or exchanges in products and goods, market transactions, and that's sort of captured in financial accounting. Environmental value is changes we create on the natural resources, the impact we have on the environment, and actually there's a lot of environmental sustainability reporting, and that captures that. And social value is then the things that we think are important that don't fall into those categories. So it's changes in people's lives that affect well-being. Yeah, and those changes in well-being might not be captured through financial transactions. And that's what social accounting is. It's really looking at what's important to people in terms of their well-being, which isn't captured in economic or environmental value. We have a piece of legislation in the UK for England and Wales, which is the Public Services Act, also known as the Social Value Act, and that defines it as the social, economic, and environmental well-being of a place. So, that's wrapping it all together, talking about well-being, and actually rooting it in a place. So that's interesting, and one to bear in mind as we go forward conversation over the next few webinars. The definition that we use at Social Value International, Social Value UK, is as follows. It's about people who experience changes, outcomes in their lives. Some of those changes are positive, some of them are negative. So it's not just looking at the intended positives, it's looking at any unintended outcomes as well. And some of them may not be the positive ones that we want to see, but it's about understanding what these changes are. It's then recognizing that some of these changes are more important to people than other changes. And so we need to understand what is most important. And if we can quantify that relative importance people place on changes, that's social value. And it doesn't always mean using monetization. I mean currency or pounds and pence to represent how important the changes are. But sometimes if people choose to do that, then you can. And that's when we talk about SROI. So social return on investment is doing absolutely this. It's understanding what changes happen in people's lives and understanding how important they are by using money and currency to express that, how important they are to people. This next slide is a very scary slide, perhaps, when you first see it, because it's got a lot on there, and it's something that I did recently to kind of illustrate what the complexity of well-being, the kind of space we're working in here. If we're trying to understand these things that are important to people about well-being, then there's a lot of different things that affect our well-being. And here is a grouping of bits of research that have been done about how we normally define well-being. So some of them are material changes to our lives, about our health, our natural environment, the money that we have, and these are all things that impact on our well-being. So those are aspects of well-being that we need to be aware of and we need to account for. There are some relational aspects of well-being that we need to consider. Social capital is a word that's often used. Or what does that mean? It's about connections. It's about who we have relationships with, and are we in control of our life? What social interactions do we have? And then the third one, going around clockwise, is subjective. How do we feel about our well-being? Do we feel good about ourselves? How is our self-esteem? And these are all kind of inextricably linked in most cases. But I think it's useful to put this up there to kind of illustrate that we're talking about a range of different things here. And there isn't one definitive list of what constitutes social value, but we need to explore all of these changes in people's lives in order to understand what's important to them and what impact we're having on those aspects of well-being. So I hope that doesn't scare you so much, but actually gives you a good insight as to the kind of things that we're looking at when we talk about improving people's well-being. There's lots of research out there on well-being, and I'd encourage you to take a look. We can share some of that as well. Social return on investment. Maybe you've heard of this, maybe you haven't. But this is basically an approach. I don't want to call it a tool or a methodology because it's actually a framework of principles which is designed to help you do this accounting, understand a broader concept of value. So you can put financial value on the same spreadsheet as social outcomes, and the social outcomes should be monetized using financial proxies to quantify that value of outcomes. And if it's all on the same spreadsheet, of course, those of you that love spreadsheets will be happy with that, and it will also allow for some comparison between value created for different stakeholder groups. And you can then also put in the amount of financial investment that goes into a project or an activity that you're measuring, and it can give you a ratio for every £1 invested creates X amount of social value. If you're interested in this as a particular approach, framework, then we have a whole 2-day training course on this and lots and lots of materials that you can read up on. I wanted to highlight that. But now hopefully we understand what social value is, what is SROI. I want to sort of explore why social value is important. Why are we all talking about it? Does anyone want to sort of share what they think are the important drivers for businesses or their organization? Why are you on the webinar today? Thank you, Simon, for making a contribution there for the previous question. Social value is about procurement, is about intangible benefits beyond the price. Perfect, yeah. So I think that kind of speaks to what we were just talking about, those intangible things that we don't normally measure, but going beyond price, yeah. And Sharon responds in terms of this question, is it about the law? Well, yes, absolutely. One of the drivers for businesses to think about social value is, of course, legislation. So I'm glad that people are using the chat, and do feel free to do that. I'll go through what are the common drivers of social value at the moment, why it's important. The first one, actually, is that there's a real recognition that being good equals good business. If you are, as a business, behaving responsibly to people and the planet, it leads to greater performance as a business. Commercially, it makes sense, which is a really good starting point to understand that we're not just doing this for the sake of doing it. It actually makes good business sense. And this diagram here I've actually taken from a protocol produced by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which is a bit of a mouthful. But this is a community of the biggest businesses in the world, multinationals, Coca-Colas, your BMWs, your Unilevers. They've produced this protocol that talks about how, as businesses, we're dependent on people to work in our businesses, people to buy our products and services. So if we don't treat people in our communities or in our workforce well, we're just not going to perform well as a business. And it's great to see that they're using the word dependencies. We are dependent on people. We need to treat them as something that we rely on, as a business, which is great. This slide is a graph of a report I was sent recently. Actually, it's from China, but all over the world, these kind of graphs are coming to light. That the businesses that have a social purpose written into their sort of their operations are outperforming other companies that don't. So this is a crude bit of analysis of the top 100 performing public limited companies in China as a big market, and the blue line represents the ones that are reporting on their social and environmental impact versus the other businesses that are just not thinking about that, and their share price is considerably higher. So this is just to kind of show that the best performing businesses are the ones that are thinking about this really well. There's more and more news articles about how investors want to invest in businesses that are thinking sustainably, whether that's about their impact on people and the planet. There's more and more headlines about how the millennials want to work in organizations that have a social purpose and have good values. These millennials shaking it up, but it's true. If you want to attract the best people, you need to be thinking about the values that you hold as an organization. The best talent will go there, and you'll spend less on recruitment. Other headlines that you'll see often is that investors are looking for impact as well, social impact as well as financial returns. So the world of investment is changing. Yesterday I saw a headline about MPs in this country who have talking about their pension fund and how their pension fund should not be investing in fossil fuels. Now, I got quite excited by that, which is now official. I get excited by pensions, which I wouldn't have thought I would ever say. But it is exciting to think that more and more people are thinking about their investments as someone who has a pension. Where do I want my money to go? Do I want my money to go into companies that are harming the environment, or perhaps harming people in their supply chain? So it is a real reason to start thinking very seriously about the impact of having on people and planet, because it's now starting to be a real factor for investors. This slide talks about a piece of research that we did at the end of last year, which was about financial accounting. We did it with YouGov, and we tested with the general public their attitudes toward financial accounting. Most people fall asleep as soon as you say the word financial accounting. It's not the most exciting or sexy of topics, but actually it revealed that people don't know much about it. They don't know what goes into financial accounting, but what they would like is to know more than just the financial returns of a business. So there is this changing public perception about what's important. It's not just about the money anymore. We don't want businesses just to be making profit without any concern for their impact on people on the planet. And that's what this research really showed. And that's started a whole campaign that we're leading, which you can find out more about if you follow us. Moving on then, you may have seen headlines recently from New Zealand, who have been quite innovative in publishing a wellbeing budget. So they've been bold, and they said that as well as a financial budget, the government has a focus on well-being. These well-being policies are emerging more and more now. The OECD are doing more and more about how you can embed well-being metrics into policies. And of course, we might be more familiar with bits of legislation that are closer to home, such as the Social Value Act. And in Wales, they have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And in Scotland, there's the Procurement Reform Act, which talks about community benefits. And essentially a similar thing, which is to think about these intangible things as we start to introduce them into policies. It's part of a wider movement of reconsidering how we define success. GDP, gross domestic product, is the indicator that all countries seem to use, have been using for the last 70 or 80 years, about whether we're doing well as a country. This picture here I like because recently somebody provocatively said, instead of measuring GDP, the key performance indicator for us should be the number of girls riding bicycles to school, which made me laugh. But actually, on a serious point, it's an interesting KPI that brings in a lot of things that we think are important: environmental, gender equality, education, health. It's a bit of a joke, but it shows to me that more and more people are wanting to move away from just one KPI, which is on financial success. Okay, Sustainable Development Goals, we've all seen this before. This is a serious movement that all businesses are now looking at and wanting to report against, as are governments. The one that I highlight there is reduced inequality, because inequality is rising within the UK. There's many reports that show that, and there's lots of evidence to show that it's hurting all of us. It's affecting our politics. It's polarizing us. It's creating divisions in society, and we need to address that. So, Social Value International, Social Value UK, and everything we do here is about tackling that inequality. And let's just remember that as we go through the next few webinars. Okay, so perhaps let's hone in now on what social value means in procurement, because that may well be why most of you have come to today's webinar. And obviously procurement for housing, we've worked well with them to talk about how this can be brought into procurement decisions. I've mentioned the 3 bits of legislation. I won't go into that again, but these bits of legislation allow us to, well, in England, it's allowed us to consider the social value of services procured. That's been the word used since 2012. For all contracts over a threshold, I think it's 112,000, social value must be considered. It's really not prescriptive at all, and local authorities are defining that in very different ways. It's one of the strengths and weaknesses of the legislation, in that it's not too prescriptive, which meant it got passed as a bill, but it also means that there's a variety of practice out there. But you will see that now, through a tendering process, cost and quality are also now accompanied by a social value section of the tendering process. And I'm sure you're all familiar that the weightings people put on this can vary. There's no set weightings on that. You can see them as low as 3 or 5%, right up to 20% on social value. The opportunities, I think we all can see that increases the value for money of our public spending. Or if you're not a public body and you're a business, then it increases the opportunity for you to create additional value with your spend. It goes beyond CSR, which is a kind of old school idea of just doing a little bit of corporate social responsibility, some activities on the side. This is really looking at how your business operates, the core activities, and hopefully as a piece of legislation, it should reward businesses that are behaving responsibly. I just flag up some challenges at the moment within procurement. As I mentioned earlier, it's the mixed practice out there. Public sector, the buyers and the suppliers are using different definitions of social value, different emphasis, and that can be a little bit confusing. There's definitely some inconsistent measurement of social value, and that's something that we're very passionate about, the measurement, the accounting. That's our mission. So we'll be talking about that as we go forward in these webinars. And a big thing for me is that I don't see enough scrutiny on the information, the social value information, or any consequences occurring for failure to deliver social value commitments. If we're serious about social value and we're giving it a big weighting in the decision making, I'd like to see some penalties for contractors who aren't delivering on social value, or just some greater scrutiny on what these social value claims are made on. My thought is that in a lot of instances, we're still not measuring what really matters. We tend to measure the easy things that are easy to measure. Here's a couple of slides just to be a bit provocative and hopefully provoke some thought amongst you. If we employ local people in a job, is that social value? If we employ an apprentice or someone who's long-term unemployed, is that social value? Perhaps if we pay a living wage, is that social value? Or if we spend X amount with social enterprises or social business, is that social value? Well, the answer, I think, is possibly yes, maybe, but not definitively yes, because a lot of these are using some assumptions. So we just need to be a little bit more sophisticated with our thinking, that if we employ a local person in a job, it might create social value, but we need to understand, what is that job? Is it a good job? Is it one that actually improves people's well-being? Does it improve their economic status? There are jobs out there that are really underpaid. The minimum wage is different to the living wage. So there's that economic value to a person, but actually, how do they feel in the workplace? We're moving into that intangible, perhaps, area, but not impossible to measure. In fact, a lot of people are measuring it. How do people feel in the workplace? And we'll get onto that in webinar 2. Who is it that gets the job? Is it somebody that was in a job last week, last month, they were employed somewhere else? Or have you given it to somebody who has been out of a job for a long time? Has it created more value for them than perhaps for people that are well qualified and had the job last week? And of course, I want to encourage people to spend more with social businesses, but just counting that doesn't necessarily mean that huge amounts of social value has been created. We need to make sure that we're measuring what really matters. Another issue that I'd like people to think about is, whose value is it? By employing an ex-offender or somebody who's been long-term unemployed, who experiences value if we do that? Is there a value to the government, a cost-benefit analysis, in saying that you've given this person a job, which means there's a saving to them in terms of welfare payments, no longer need to pay job seekers allowance? Yes, possibly, yes. We've helped the government solve one of their aims and perhaps reduce some welfare expenditure. But have we considered the value to the person themselves of getting the job? There's 2 different stakeholders there, as well as perhaps many other stakeholders like the wider community, and the business perhaps that's employed that ex-offender or long-term unemployed. So value is being created by a range of different stakeholders, and I think it's important that we acknowledge that and build that into the measurement, because if we only focus on cost savings to the government from this, then what we are doing is looking at value to the government and not looking at how much value we're creating for people. So this is just to say that let's consider this is a multi-stakeholder issue with value being created for different stakeholders, and measurement needs to be considered from those different perspectives. Good news from UK. I like that headline. The Act itself is being strengthened, and last December central government said that they were changing some of the language to move from considering social value to evaluating, which is a great step in the right direction. I think you can all agree with me when I say the word consider is a very weak word. And the Act is extending its scope to central government spending on goods as well as services. And there's real momentum building. That's the other good news. There's so many conversations now happening across our membership. We're growing, and good practices emerging from that. People are sharing what's working, and they're engaging with these issues so that we are going past these sort of initial assumptions and becoming more sophisticated in our understanding of what really matters to people and therefore what we should be measuring. We're lucky in this country, as well as having this piece of legislation, we have organisations like Social Enterprise, which represent a movement of different types of businesses, and they do progress reports, and that's something that they do annually, I think, and this is one of their most recent reports, which has got some good facts to show that local councils are improving their understanding. Many of them now have policies in place and have changed the way they're spending money and allocating their resources. So things are going in the right direction. We're also lucky we have lots of public data sets. If you want to look at the cost benefit, you can go and look at that, quite freely available. We also have the Office of National Statistics, which has data on well-being. That sort of thing that we said was hard and intangible. Well, if you check out their website, there's plenty on there to show that we can measure well-being, and it's free. We're also blessed, or perhaps it's not a blessing, it's a curse, that we have lots of different tools and products out there to understand and measure social value. Some of these may be familiar with you. We've talked already about SROI. You may be familiar with HACT, Social Auditing Network, Social Profit Calculator, Social Value Portal, all these software tools. So that is great, although it can be a little bit of a maze, and I'll help you to navigate that. But before we jump into the measurement, I want to take you through an example, because that's sometimes easy to see where social value is being created. Here is just a made-up example of perhaps a public services contract. This is hypothetical. It's perhaps a 5-year contract to build a new hospital. Who experiences social value? Remember, social value is changes in well-being. I'll ask you to think about it, give you 30 seconds, pop it in the chat. Who are the stakeholders of a contract like this? Members of the public. Thanks, Jane. Absolutely. So just building a new hospital will have an impact on members of the public. Anyone else? What other stakeholders do we have? If we build a hospital, who else is affected? The labour market, so people looking for jobs, absolutely. The area in where it's being built, yeah. So the local community, of course, will experience changes, whether that's disturbance or good changes or bad changes. Love it. Okay, so potential staff, local businesses. This is great. Yeah, absolutely. All these things are true. There are, in fact, lots, and we could go on for a while. Broadly, yeah, customers, end users of the hospital, the general public, we said that one. People in the community, people living in that local area will experience some change, and people working on delivery, as well as the government. I suppose that would be the fourth big one, really, but I like to sort of group them like that in terms of a starting point. Inherent value in building a hospital, building homes, delivering, providing social housing. There is value to the people who use the hospital. We change the lives of people in the community, or it's often done through volunteering, bespoke projects, or even just donating to local charities. And we'll really unpick that in webinar 3. An embedded value is a term one of our members. So these inherent, added, and embedded are terms that one of our members came up with, which I quite like. It helps to sort of compartmentalize where value is being created, and we'll be looking at this embedded value of value created for the workforce, particularly in webinar 2. And of course, that extends through a supply chain of a number of businesses, big businesses and also local businesses, used in the delivery of that contract. And I want to say that businesses are already doing lots of things in an attempt to create more social value. If we think about social value for employees and the workforce, there's a range of different things that businesses do to control the impact on people's lives. Real spectrum here. From one end, businesses are doing stuff to prevent slavery, protect human rights. There's a kind of minimum bar there, you'd like to think. But moving through to kind of more progressive workers' rights, pay ratios, decent wages, through to personal development, fairness in the workplace, employee engagement, right through to the other end, employee well-being, and health and safety, interestingly, these days is kind of emerging into kind of more proactive well-being in the workplace sort of initiatives. And lots of businesses are doing so much on this. And for me, I like to see this as part of social value and make it all joined up, because if social value is about the impact we have on people's lives, then let's use that definition and recognize that we're already doing a lot, and we could probably build on that. Social value for the wider community. Again, businesses are doing lots already to control the impact they're having on people's lives. Whether that's donations, offering some volunteering out into the community, or partnering with charities or social sector organisations in different ways, is a way that they can help the community. Some, of course, enter into more bespoke projects with the local communities that they're working in, and I'd argue if you do that, then you're able to tackle particular bespoke needs. The inherent social value is the quality, I suppose, aspect of what you're delivering. If you're delivering homes or hospitals or any service really, are you working with your end users to make sure that the quality is as good as it can be? So that's also something that you should think about in terms of social value. In the environment, we know that businesses and all types of organisations are getting much better at understanding and accounting for their environment. So this is all to say that businesses are doing this. This is a good starting point. Using social enterprises more. I mentioned Social Enterprise UK. They have an initiative called My Social Corporate Challenge. Some of you may have heard that. It's really a challenge to get a big corporates to spend more with social enterprises, and they've recently released a report to show the success of that, which and also some learnings and some challenges that have emerged from creating those partnerships between big business and smaller social enterprises. These things are all good, and they're behaviours that might create positive social value, but we only know if it's positive social value if we actually start to measure and manage it. So whilst all that should give you some confidence, we now want to know, well, okay, how can we be sure that what we're doing there is creating social value? And I will talk about the building blocks, but first of all, I think there's 3 slides which are useful to kind of set the context of why we need to measure. Why do we? Let's just have a little thing. Well, the normal response is things like, I need to report social value to my funders, or we need to comply with regulations, or my board need to know what impact social value we're creating. So these are kind of fairly top-down reasons to measure social value. The other one, of course, is we need to measure so we can get better and create more value. And that's something that we shouldn't forget. And these are slightly different motivations for measurement, and that just needs to be acknowledged. And we need to be comfortable with that and respond to those different questions and different people that we're perhaps collecting information for. We often talk about proving impact versus improving impact. Not mutually exclusive, but two different exercises perhaps. Do we collect the same data for both? Are we collecting information just to prove? Is that then useful in improving? These are all questions to think about. If we're trying to improve our impact on our social value, we collect some information, can we then use that to prove? Of course, we can. But these are different starting points and useful to consider if we want to do this meaningfully. All of this can help you, of course, secure funding and become more successful commercially, because it will help your performance. Why should we? So again, marketing, fundraising, regulations, but it's about accountability at the end of the day to those people that are affected, and an opportunity to maximize social value. Thirdly, third slide on this is just to consider who we are accountable to. There's a range of people that we are accountable to. Regulators, perhaps we have governance boards, or perhaps we have funders, people that have given us money, we're accountable to them. Are we also accountable to our customers, our beneficiaries, users, whatever you want to call it, and the wider public? And it's important to recognize that there's a real power, range in power here. Who holds power over you? And as we go down the list, there is less power from our customers, particularly if we're working in broken markets with vulnerable people who are not paying for our service, like social housing. What mechanisms do we have in place for them to hold us accountable for our actions, as well as the wider public? So those are the reasons and important things to consider before we start looking at how we actually do it. But I will briefly introduce what I call the building blocks for IMM. Stands for Impact Measurement and Management, or social value. We like to think about 10 questions actually. I will share these with you so you can go through them, and these are actually the questions that keep coming up time and time again all around the world. All the different approaches that are out there to how you measure and manage social impact, social value, are really sort of tackling these questions. What is the problem we're trying to solve? Solution. And then things like, who is it that changes? And the more we can go into that who is going to be beneficial. Like, what subgroups are there? What segmentation can we do? Because they all experience different outcomes. And then how can we measure those outcomes and the relative importance of them is really, really key questions that we should be asking. So we'll come back to that repeatedly. And then we've got to think about who answers these questions. That's the power shift thing again. Are we answering these questions ourselves, or are we giving an opportunity for the people that experience change to answer them? And how much detail or rigor or precision do we need in answering these questions? Well, there's a really cheesy catchphrase there, which is enough precision for the decision, which hopefully that will stick in your head, because actually we shouldn't worry too much about being precise. If the decisions we're informing are smaller decisions, we need to be confident in the data that we're using in proportionate to the decisions we're making. I often say if you had £10 million and you're deciding whether to invest that in 2 initiatives, then you'd want these questions, these 10 impact questions, answered to a pretty good level of rigor. But if you're not investing £10 million and you just have maybe say £10,000, less levels of rigor is absolutely fine. So these 10 questions are, as I say, emerging in all sorts of different approaches to managing impact, including the UNDP, the Impact Management Project, which are big international global initiatives about standardizing impact accounting. So start with those 10 questions, and that will stand you in good stead. The other big building block is principles, because all of our work is based around a principles-based approach to accounting for value. We'll send you a little leaflet on this, which talks about these 7 wonderful principles, which help you to kind of get systems in place for collecting the right information. Involving stakeholders is number one, and it actually sits at the heart of these other principles. How can we make sure that we are involving the people that experience social value in understanding what changes, valuing the things that matter, not overclaiming, being transparent, etc., etc. So linked to those principles, we have guides on the SRI, which is an approach based on principles. We have standards that have been developed around these principles, and we'll certainly share links to those as well. We're running out of time, but I just briefly want to flag up that we'll be talking about the key to good measurement in the next two webinars, which is about measuring the right outcomes. We talked earlier about how we measuring what matters. Are we always looking at positive, negative, intended and unintended? And who is it that defines the outcomes? Is it always a top-down approach to defining outcomes, or are we giving the opportunity for people to say what changes in their lives, and these are the outcomes that we then go and measure? Key to outcomes really is open-ended questions, amplifying the voice of people that often aren't involved in these conversations. So I have some final conclusions or top tips to leave you with before we have a few minutes for questions. It's really good if you have somebody on your board or high up in your organization with a real passion and understanding of impact. The board is ultimately responsible. So if you have someone, great. If you don't, it would be good if you could find someone who can champion it at that level. Because it's about creating a culture of constant improvement, of accountability, and that really comes from leadership at the board level and senior management as well. See this as a journey and something that you do regularly rather than a one-off event. If we do social impact or social value measurement once to a high level of rigor, or do we do it regularly but less rigorously and improve over time? I think that's what we need to recognize, is that we're not going to do it perfect first time. Let's just do it regularly and get better each time, getting more and more data, answering those questions, and that will equip us with more information to make decisions. Let's recognize that this isn't a perfect science. We're looking at people's lives. It is messy. It requires a lot of judgment calls. And we often quote John Maynard Keynes, who said it's better to be vaguely right than precisely wrong. So there you go. I shouldn't really quote economists, but I think that's a useful one to bear in mind here. Again, I kind of want to sort of emphasize this point. It's about talking to people. It's very easy for us to hide these days behind surveys and questionnaires or use data sets that are available. But actually, if we're to deal with inequality and recognize what we need to do, we need to talk and listen and take risks. This is a mouse taking a risk, but we need to be brave enough to change the way that we make decisions and our behaviors, and we can do that. We can manage that risk by collecting as much information we can from stakeholders. So almost there, impact measurement is a state of mind, really. It's a culture of an organization of being accountable and striving for continuous innovation to make our services as good as possible for people we serve, whether they pay for our services or not. And accountability and innovation can actually be two sides of the same coin. If we are continuously innovating, then we are demonstrating accountability to our end customers. Last one then is about consideration of our social value certificate, which is a bit of a plug, but I hope that it's a useful one. We've designed this with our members to help people on that journey of implementing good systems and processes. So there's a commitment level, policies or planning, and then implementation is level 2 is achieved when you've implemented those commitments, and level 3 is when you can demonstrate that you are maximizing your social value through your decision making. Everyone has this t-shirt, or at least should. No, it's not really something that we love, is it? Sort of auditing and assurance, but I do think it's important and provides credibility and scrutiny to the work that we do. Okay, I was rushing a little bit towards the end. I hope you don't mind, because I wanted to leave a couple of minutes to see if you've left any questions in the chat. I'll have a look now, but feel free to unmute yourself and dive in if you want. Does anyone have any questions right now? Of course, what I will do is share the slides, and if you have any questions, I can bring them into webinars 2 and 3, if that's an easy way to do it. Anyone have any further comments or reflections? Okay, we do have a question here. Do we link in with the Welsh Wellbeing and Future Generations Act? Yes, absolutely. Our accounting approach is about well-being, and the Welsh piece of legislation is fantastic. So I'll happily say yes to that, and also if you'd like, drop me an email and we can talk further about that one. Another question here is from Barry. My finance director said, are we paying more because we are including social value? Yeah, interesting one. Yes, I think if you want to create social value, there will be some extra costs. Not always. You can do things without, but we can't ignore that you will need to put some more resources into, for a start, accounting for it and measuring for it. And maybe social value creation means you will have to pay people a little bit more wages or design new services, and that may well influence costs. So it's about blending costs and financial value with the social value. And in some instances, there are trade-offs where it may well cost more. But are we willing as businesses to pay more if it means we're creating more social value? And those are decisions that should be made at the boardroom level. Okay, we're approaching the end of the hour, and I need to finish promptly today because I actually have another webinar to do. But I would like to thank you for joining today, for all your contributions here, and I will be looking forward to continuing these conversations in the next webinar, and Lucinda will share the date soon. Okay, thanks everyone.